Hey guys, today we're heading back to a time when survival wasn't guaranteed, when the elements were harsh and every day was a battle to stay alive. Picture yourself in the midst of a prehistoric landscape, wide open spaces, thick forests, and the constant presence of danger. But there's one thing that makes it all bearable: fire. You've managed to gather the right materials, coax the flames into life, and now warmth and light are within your grasp. But here's the kicker: you probably won't survive this if you don't hold onto that fire. Fire wasn't just a luxury in this world, it was survival. And when it came to survival, fire wasn't shared freely, it was fought for. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Fire, such an essential tool for early humans, wasn't just about keeping warm. It was a tool for cooking, protection from predators, and even for creating better tools. Fire could mean the difference between life and death. But here's the twist: this life-saving element, as crucial as it was, caused its fair share of drama. Imagine being part of a group, huddling around a fire that you and your tribe worked so hard to create. Suddenly, someone from another group tries to take it, or perhaps a fight breaks out over who gets to control it. Fire wasn't just a resource, it was power. And power, as we know, often leads to conflict. In this section, we'll explore the first known human disputes over fire, how something so fundamental to life became the focal point of human conflict. Early humans weren't just fighting for land, food, or territory. They were fighting for fire. The ability to control fire wasn't just a matter of convenience. It was a matter of survival, and whoever had it held the power to stay alive longer. Fire was far more than just a useful tool for early Homo sapiens. It was the cornerstone of their survival. Think about it. You're sitting by the fire, the warmth of the flames radiating through the cold night air. Around you, the darkness of the wilderness looms, filled with the sounds of predators stalking through the brush. But with fire, you're safe, at least for now. It's your protector, your source of heat, and your means of cooking. It allows you to make better tools, keep the animals at bay, and even create warmth for your group. But fire wasn't just your own private little luxury. It was a communal lifeline. And when a limited resource like that becomes essential to survival, it isn't long before the disputes over who controls it begin. Historians still argue over the first instances of human conflict and whether the earliest skirmishes were over fire, food, or territory. Some suggest that early humans might have fought for access to fire in a similar way they fought over food. With fire being such a vital part of daily life, necessary for cooking, warmth, and protection, it's no surprise that it became a focal point for disputes. Early human groups didn't live in the comfortable, well-protected homes we know today. They didn't have access to supermarkets or easy cooking methods. Fire was a rare, precious commodity that they fought tooth and nail to protect. Without it, you'd be exposed to the elements, unable to hunt or prepare food effectively. Imagine this: you're part of a small group, and you've spent hours gathering wood, striking stones to create sparks, and finally coaxing fire into existence. The fire burns brightly in front of you, lighting the dark, keeping you warm. But then, just as you're starting to feel comfortable, another group of humans approaches. They've seen your fire, and they're hungry, cold, and desperate. They want what you have, your fire. What would you do? Hand it over or fight to keep your life-saving resource? This wasn't just a conflict over warmth, it was a matter of survival. These early disputes were likely brutal and unorganized, much like the rest of early human interactions. Unlike modern warfare, early human conflicts over fire were probably quick and direct. With no established rules of engagement, no standing armies, and no clear strategy, early humans likely fought fiercely over fire, using whatever they had at hand, whether it was stones, clubs, or even their fists. The fight wasn't about outsmarting the other group. It was about making sure that your group stayed alive, and in a world of limited resources, fire was one of the most essential. But why was fire such a critical element in early human disputes? For one, it was a resource that provided immediate and tangible benefits. Fire could protect you from the cold, cook your food, and keep predators at bay. Without fire, survival would have been far more difficult, especially in the harsh environments of the Ice Age. Early humans didn't have the modern tools or techniques to live comfortably without it. Fire was the key to maintaining the daily rhythms of life. It wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. And, of course, fire wasn't easily portable. You couldn't just carry a spark with you and make a fire wherever you went. Gathering wood, tending the flame, and protecting the fire were all time-consuming tasks. Keeping a fire going meant constant vigilance. If another group were to come along and take your fire, or worse, extinguish it, that would mean hours of work to get it back. In a world where survival depended on using resources as efficiently as possible, losing fire wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a disaster. The disputes over fire weren't just the result of immediate scarcity, they were also about control. The ability to control fire meant the ability to shape your environment. Early humans who had fire had power, and this power created a social dynamic that was rooted in resource control. Fire allowed them to cook food, make tools, and provide warmth, which was crucial for maintaining strength and health. It wasn't just about survival, it was about securing your place within the social structure. Who controlled the fire? Who made sure it kept burning? Those who were in charge of the fire likely had the most influence in the group. The importance of fire as a social and survival tool meant that it didn't just help early humans to survive, it shaped their social bonds, hierarchies, and strategies for conflict. Early humans weren't just fighting over land or food, they were fighting over the very resources that allowed them to thrive. And the competition for fire may have sparked a greater understanding of group dynamics, territory, and social cohesion, laying the foundation for more organized human interactions down the line. These early conflicts over something as fundamental as fire were the first steps in humanity's long, complicated relationship with war, survival, and social cooperation. As early humans began to fight over fire, the concept of territoriality took on a new, vital significance. In the raw, unforgiving world they inhabited, fire was as valuable as land, water, or food. It was central to the very act of survival. Think about it. The struggle wasn't just about defending your territory in the way we might think of a fight over land today. It was about the fight to keep your community alive, and fire was the lifeblood of that survival. When fire was lost, it meant not just the physical loss of warmth, but the metaphorical loss of control. A tribe that lost its fire was at risk of losing everything: safety, food, and the ability to thrive in the harsh environment. Historians still debate how early humans developed the understanding of territory. Did they establish land claims out of instinct, driven by the need for resources? Or was it more of a gradual process, one that became apparent over time as human groups grew more competitive for resources like fire and food? Some suggest that early Homo sapiens, like modern primates, didn't understand territory in the way we do today. Instead, the concept of owning or controlling space and resources might have been more fluid, based on immediate need and survival. Others believe that with the rise of more permanent shelters and social structures, humans began to develop a deeper sense of territoriality. But one thing is clear: the more that fire became an essential part of daily life, the more fiercely it was defended. Groups that had mastered the art of keeping fire burning had an advantage over those who didn't. The ability to sustain a fire wasn't just a skill, it was a power move. It made you a leader in the eyes of others, a provider of warmth and sustenance. As a result, groups began to fight over fire in increasingly strategic ways. It wasn't just a matter of fighting to keep warm, it was a struggle for dominance, a contest to secure the most vital resource of the time. In the early days, humans probably didn't have formal ways of organizing these disputes. There were no warriors, no armies, no tactics. The fights were likely small, chaotic, and based on immediate needs. But as these skirmishes over fire and resources became more common, humans began to develop more complex methods for resolving conflict. Perhaps leaders emerged, those who understood how to keep the fire going and make sure the community stayed warm and fed. And perhaps these leaders began to have more power over other members of the tribe, not just for their skill in hunting or gathering, but for their control over fire. Imagine the tension between two competing tribes, one with fire, one without. The tribe without fire might have to resort to desperate measures, attempting to steal back fire, or even demanding it from their neighbors. This sort of primitive conflict could easily escalate. With limited resources and a fragile existence, these early conflicts would have been primal, intense, and potentially deadly. When the fire was at stake, there was no room for compromise. The struggle to control fire would have shaped early human communities in profound ways, not only driving conflict, but also fostering the rise of leadership and social order. But it wasn't just the possession of fire that created disputes, it was also how fire was used and shared within the community. In groups where fire was kept alive as a central element of survival, the distribution of fire might have been a source of conflict. Who gets to sit closest to the fire? Who has the right to keep it alive at all costs? These weren't trivial questions. In the world of early humans, fire was power, and it was something to be guarded and respected. The group that controlled fire had a significant advantage over other groups, making fire sharing or fire hoarding central to the social dynamics of these communities. As early humans expanded beyond small, isolated groups and began interacting with neighboring tribes, the concept of fire as a territorial resource became even more crucial. The struggle for fire was no longer confined to personal survival, it was tied to the survival of entire communities. These struggles likely became more organized over time, giving birth to early forms of conflict resolution and even diplomacy. Some tribes might have used the exchange of fire as a way to create alliances or to assert dominance. The fire itself wasn't just a tool, it was a bargaining chip, a currency of survival and power. And all the while, the role of fire continued to grow. It wasn't just about warmth anymore, it was about shaping the future. Early humans realized that the ability to control fire meant they could change the environment around them. Fire gave them the power to cook food, which allowed them to obtain more calories and sustain their energy levels. It enabled them to create better tools, weapons, and shelter. Fire became a symbol of advancement, a crucial step in human evolution, but also a source of division, conflict, and struggle. So, what did this all mean for early Homo sapiens? The disputes over fire, the small territorial skirmishes, the emergence of leaders, these early conflicts set the stage for a much larger human story. The struggles over fire weren't just about flame and warmth. They were about power, survival, and the formation of social structures. They were the first hints of something more complex, something that would evolve over thousands of years: organized warfare, leadership, and civilization itself. As early Homo sapiens navigated the harsh environments they lived in, disputes over fire would have evolved into more than just spontaneous brawls. They began to form the bedrock of social organization and leadership within early human groups. The ability to control fire meant survival, but it also meant power. And with power came responsibility, hierarchy, and eventually leadership. In those first moments when humans fought over fire, the seeds of social structures were being planted. Picture the scene. You're a member of a small tribe, huddled around a fire, the warmth pushing back the chill of the night. You've worked tirelessly to keep the fire going, hunting, gathering, tending the flames. The fire represents everything: warmth, protection, food. Then, one day, another group arrives, looking to take your fire for themselves. You've got nothing left but your stone-tipped spear and your resolve. In the chaos, you realize this isn't just about the fire anymore. This is about survival. And the struggle for that one essential resource might soon shape the very foundation of who leads, who follows, and who is left behind. Historians still debate how exactly early humans developed social structures around resources like fire. Some suggest that early humans formed small, egalitarian groups where everyone shared resources, including fire. Others argue that these groups gradually became more hierarchical as the need for defense, cooperation, and leadership grew. Whatever the case, it's clear that early disputes over resources were not just about survival. They were a precursor to the more organized and systematic conflicts that would emerge later in human history. These early human groups likely didn't have formal leadership structures like we do today, but as disputes over fire became more common, the need for leaders likely arose. The person who could keep the fire going and ensure the survival of the group would become indispensable. Whether through charisma, skill, or sheer force, these individuals would gain influence. Leaders may have been the best hunters, the most skilled toolmakers, or the individuals who had the best understanding of how to manage resources like fire. Over time, these leaders would play a central role in organizing defense, making decisions about territory, and controlling access to essential resources. But leadership wasn't without its complications. The distribution of fire within a group wasn't as simple as everyone gets a share. Some individuals or families likely had greater access to fire, and with that privilege came the risk of jealousy and conflict. Even within groups, competition for fire would have created tensions. Those closest to the fire would be the ones with warmth, security, and better chances of survival. Those further away from the fire, literally and figuratively, would have had to fight to stay warm, to stay fed, to stay alive. Fire wasn't just a resource. It was the difference between life and death. As humans settled into more permanent areas and began to build more substantial shelters, the role of fire in social dynamics only grew. Fire became central not just to daily survival, but to rituals, ceremonies, and the forming of alliances. The ability to control fire became symbolic of control over the group. Leaders who could manage fire, defend it, and make sure it was shared could establish themselves as the authority in the tribe. In this way, fire wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of the community's structure, power, and survival. What's also fascinating is that fire was likely involved in early spiritual practices. Many ancient cultures saw fire as a divine element, a gift from the gods, or a connection to the afterlife. Early humans didn't just use fire to cook or stay warm. They also used it in rituals and ceremonies to honor spirits, mark milestones, and forge connections with other groups. This spiritual connection to fire would have only heightened its importance in early human disputes. Possessing fire didn't just mean survival, it also meant having a direct connection to the divine, to the forces that governed the world. Historians still argue about the spiritual significance of fire in early human societies. Some believe fire was simply a tool for survival, with its symbolic and spiritual meanings developed later. Others suggest that early humans understood the spiritual power of fire long before they became settled or agricultural. Fire likely played a role in human mythology long before it played a role in large-scale societal development. The importance of fire in early human life can't be overstated. It wasn't just a resource. It was a lifeline, a symbol, and a critical part of early human social and spiritual life. The first disputes over fire weren't just about survival. They were about establishing power, social control, and connections to the divine. The chaotic, unorganized battles for fire led to a gradual understanding of social structures and hierarchy, creating the foundation for larger, more complex human societies. It was the first step in the long history of human conflict, and the first clue that humans were more than just survivors. They were builders of cultures, societies, and, eventually, civilizations. As early humans fought over fire, the consequences of these disputes weren't just limited to the immediate survival of the group. The conflicts over fire helped shape early human social structures, and these structures, over time, would evolve into something more formal and organized. What started as an immediate, necessary battle for a crucial resource, one that provided warmth, food, and protection, slowly turned into a larger struggle for control and dominance within the tribe. Fire wasn't just about keeping warm anymore, it was about maintaining power and stability. In the context of early human societies, where resources were scarce and survival was a daily challenge, power dynamics were incredibly fragile. As tribes began to develop, fire was one of the few resources that required constant maintenance. Having control over fire meant having control over the tribe's well-being. And with this control came responsibility. Early human leaders weren't just warriors or hunters, they were the keepers of fire. The tribe's safety, warmth, and food security depended on these leaders' ability to keep the fire going and to ensure it was shared fairly among the group. Historians still debate whether early leadership was driven more by necessity or inherent hierarchy. Some suggest that leadership arose out of necessity. Those who were best at managing resources like fire and food were naturally elevated to positions of authority. Others argue that power structures emerged gradually as human societies became more complex. But what's clear is that the control of fire played a pivotal role in the early development of leadership. Being able to control this vital resource made individuals invaluable to the group. Leaders who controlled fire not only had power over the group's survival, they also became symbols of stability, trust, and security. Yet, despite the essential role fire played in early human societies, these conflicts also marked the beginning of a darker aspect of human nature, competition. Once humans learned to control fire, they also began to understand how powerful fire could be as a tool of coercion. The ability to monopolize fire meant that individuals or tribes could leverage their control for power. Early human groups likely found themselves in conflicts not just over survival, but over who had the right to access fire. Think about it. When you control the fire, you control a critical aspect of life. Fire wasn't just about staying warm, it was about cooking food, providing light in the darkness, and fending off dangerous predators. So, when one group had fire and another didn't, the power imbalance was glaring. The group with fire had the advantage, not just physically, but socially. They could invite others to share the warmth, offer protection, and create alliances. In some cases, fire might have even been used as a form of currency or trade. Those with fire might have exchanged it for food, tools, or other resources. This power dynamic would have created tension and jealousy, especially as human societies became more interconnected. The question of who had access to fire might have driven early human conflicts even further. But these disputes also pushed early humans to develop strategies for conflict resolution. It's likely that some groups developed ways to negotiate or compromise, while others may have resorted to violence to settle disputes. But the most interesting part of these early struggles is that they laid the foundation for something much larger. The idea that a resource, whether food, water, or fire, could be a source of power was a crucial realization for early humans. From this understanding came the rise of leadership, social hierarchies, and the establishment of rules to manage resources. The first disputes over fire were the first steps toward the development of systems for organizing societies. These early struggles helped humans understand the importance of managing not just resources, but relationships, cooperation, and competition within their communities. And as human groups grew larger and more organized, the role of fire expanded. It wasn't just a tool of survival anymore, it became central to human social life. The fire wasn't just for warmth, it was the heart of the community, the place where people gathered, where decisions were made, and where stories were shared. It became more than just a physical object, it was a symbol of unity, a point of gathering, and the very center of social life. Historians still debate when exactly human societies became complex enough to require structured leadership, but what's clear is that fire was a major player in this development. Early humans didn't just learn how to control fire, they learned how to control the social dynamics around fire. From the chaos of early disputes came the foundation of social cooperation, leadership, and collective survival. Fire wasn't just a tool of necessity, it was the spark that would eventually ignite the fire of human civilization. As fire became a central part of early human life, It wasn't just a practical tool. It began to shape the structure of early human societies in ways that would influence the course of history. Fire, in its many forms, became more than just a survival mechanism. It was a cornerstone of social and spiritual life, a symbol of cooperation, control, and even power. With fire at the center of early human settlements, the stakes of its control grew, and the role it played in shaping the social dynamics of groups became increasingly clear. Think about the implications of having fire in a group setting. The people who controlled the fire had the ability to keep warm, to cook food, and to fend off wild animals. It wasn't just a matter of physical survival, it was a matter of influence. The tribe that controlled the fire would have been seen as the more powerful group. But this wasn't just about having warmth on cold nights. It was about the group's access to resources, protection, and security. Control over fire gave an individual or group an undeniable advantage, both in terms of immediate survival and social leverage. In small, nomadic bands, this dynamic may have been less noticeable. Groups were tight-knit, and resources like fire were shared more freely. However, as Homo sapiens transitioned to more sedentary lifestyles and began to settle in one place, the social structure grew more complex. With larger groups and more permanent settlements came the need for leadership, organization, and, inevitably, power struggles. These struggles were often fought over access to resources, but none were as powerful and as life-sustaining as fire. The possession of fire became one of the most important factors in the establishment of leadership and control within groups. Consider this: a tribe in a cold, harsh environment, struggling to survive the elements. The leader of the group is the one who can maintain the fire, who can ensure that everyone stays warm, fed, and protected. This leader, whether they rose to power through strength, wisdom, or sheer necessity, held the key to the group's survival. And those who challenged the leader's authority were not just fighting for power, they were fighting for the right to control one of the most vital resources in their world. The struggle for fire was a struggle for control, and it became one of the first catalysts for the development of leadership roles within early human communities. Historians still argue whether early human leadership was purely a result of physical prowess, or if it was more about the ability to control essential resources. Some suggest that the strongest and most capable hunters were naturally elevated to positions of leadership, while others argue that leadership was more about the ability to keep the group safe, to ensure their survival, and to maintain control over things like fire. Regardless of the specifics, what's clear is that control over fire played a pivotal role in the establishment of leadership. It was a resource that, once harnessed, elevated individuals to positions of power, and that power was hard to relinquish. In addition to its role in leadership, fire also played a crucial role in early social cohesion. Gathering around the fire wasn't just about warmth, it was about community. The fire became the center of social life. It was where stories were told, rituals were performed, and group decisions were made. It wasn't just the physical warmth of the fire that mattered, it was the social warmth it provided. People gathered around it to share food, to bond, and to connect with each other. The fire wasn't just an object, it was the thread that wove early human communities together, providing not only physical comfort, but emotional and social connection. Yet, this fire was also a source of division. As human groups grew larger, disputes over fire became more common. Who controlled it, who had access to it, and who could use it for their own benefit became central issues. In the absence of formal social structures or laws, conflicts over fire could easily escalate into violence. The need to defend the fire and protect the group from outsiders or rival tribes made it clear that the possession of fire was a matter of life and death. These early territorial disputes, fueled by the control of fire, set the stage for the larger, more organized conflicts that would follow in human history. The role of fire in these early human conflicts cannot be overstated. While it was a tool for survival, it was also a tool of power. The group that controlled fire had the power to shape its environment, to hunt, cook, and defend. This power dynamic fueled competition, cooperation, and conflict, and it set the stage for the rise of more complex societies. As humans learned to control fire, they also learned to control the dynamics within their communities. The struggle for fire wasn't just about survival. It was about the social, political, and spiritual forces that governed early human existence. Through the struggles over fire, early humans began to understand the importance of cooperation and organization. The leader who controlled the fire, who kept it burning, became the one with the most influence and power. As human societies grew, so too did the complexity of their social structures. Leadership, control of resources, and conflict resolution all became more organized, and fire was the foundation upon which these structures were built. As early humans evolved, so did the role of fire in their social and cultural life. With the increase in group size and the transition toward more permanent settlements, fire became not just a tool of survival, it became a central element in the formation of social bonds, hierarchies, and cultural identity. The power to control fire continued to symbolize influence and leadership within the group, but it also had a profound effect on how early humans interacted with each other and the world around them. In the early stages of human society, fire was everything. It wasn't just a source of warmth, it was an essential part of the survival toolkit. Foraging for food, hunting, and protection from predators all revolved around fire. The simple act of gathering around the fire at night wasn't just about staying warm, it was a time for socializing, for sharing stories, for bonding. The fire became the social center of the group, a place where ideas were exchanged, traditions were passed down, and community ties were strengthened. Imagine sitting around a fire after a long day, the flickering flames casting shadows on the walls of your shelter, and hearing the elders tell tales of past hunts, the origins of your people, and lessons learned from long-forgotten generations. This wasn't just a survival tool, it was the heart of community life. But as fire became more essential to survival, it also became more contested. Tribes and groups began to form over time, and with this increased social complexity came the need for control. Access to fire wasn't just about staying warm, it was about asserting power. Who controlled the fire in a group? Who got to sit closest to it, who tended to it, who guarded it, had social significance. The firekeeper wasn't just the person who made sure the flames didn't die out. They were the one who had the most influence over the tribe's daily existence. The closer you were to the fire, the more power you had. It became a status symbol. Historians still debate how exactly the role of fire was tied to early social stratification. Some suggest that the firekeeper, often a respected leader or elder, had the highest status within the group. Others argue that leadership was more fluid, with control of fire shifting depending on the immediate needs of the group. Regardless, what is clear is that fire played a key role in defining social roles. As humans transitioned from small, nomadic groups to more organized communities, the possession and management of fire became critical to survival, identity, and status. The fire didn't just serve practical purposes, it helped shape the emotional and psychological landscapes of early human communities. The act of sharing fire likely reinforced bonds of trust, cooperation, and solidarity. But with this increased social complexity, conflict also became inevitable. Fire, being so central to survival, became a source of tension when resources were limited. The first human wars, even if they weren't large-scale battles like those we think of today, were likely born out of competition for fire and other vital resources. Tribes would fight to control fire, using it as leverage for power, alliances, or survival. The control of fire represented more than just practical necessity. It symbolized the tribe's capacity to thrive in a world where resources were constantly at risk of running out. As fire became more embedded in social dynamics, humans began to develop more organized forms of conflict resolution. Conflicts over fire, food, or territory could no longer be solved with simple skirmishes. They required negotiation, diplomacy, and sometimes even warfare. Fire was no longer just about keeping warm. It was about control, authority, and dominance. Those who could keep the fire going, protect it, and share it strategically had a significant advantage. The role of fire in early conflict wasn't just about violence. It was about the dynamics of power, leadership, and survival. As human society grew more complex, fire became a focal point for larger-scale conflicts, leading to the eventual development of formal leadership systems and military strategies. What began as simple survival struggles over fire would eventually evolve into organized battles fought over territories, resources, and ideologies. The first disputes over fire were just the beginning of a much larger human narrative, one that would include war, civilization building, and the complex social structures that we recognize today. Yet, despite all the conflicts that arose from the possession of fire, it was still a symbol of unity. Early humans may have fought over fire, but they also came together because of it. They understood that to survive, they had to share, collaborate, and adapt. Fire wasn't just a resource. It was the thread that tied humans together, shaping early human interactions, cooperation, and society. Without it, survival would have been infinitely more difficult, but with it, they learned the importance of community. Fire, as a tool and a symbol, defined the early trajectory of human social life. It's fascinating to consider that the need to control and manage fire was one of the first steps in humanity's journey toward creating more complex social systems and societies. From small, desperate fights for survival to larger, more organized struggles for control, fire played an integral role in shaping the human experience. The fire, once a simple tool, evolved into a symbol of power, unity, and survival, a cornerstone for the rise of human civilization. As fire continued to shape early human societies, the consequences of its control and distribution stretched beyond the immediate effects of survival. It wasn't just about fending off the cold or cooking food. Fire was beginning to define the very structure of human existence. By now, early humans had learned that possessing fire wasn't just a matter of comfort, it was a matter of survival. However, as groups began to develop and settle into more permanent communities, fire evolved from being a simple tool to something that represented much more: power, identity, and social cohesion. As we've already explored, early humans didn't just rely on fire for warmth and sustenance. They relied on it as a tool to secure their place within the tribe. But fire also had spiritual implications. The flickering flame wasn't just a source of light, it was a link to the spiritual world. For early humans, fire was often seen as a gift from the gods or the very essence of life itself. Rituals surrounding fire, whether for blessing a hunt, ensuring the success of the harvest, or marking important life events, became deeply embedded in human culture. The fire was sacred, and whoever controlled it had not just the physical power to protect the group, but the spiritual authority to guide it. Historically, this spiritual connection to fire is still a subject of debate. Some anthropologists argue that the sacred significance of fire developed over time, particularly as humans became more sedentary and began to establish more complex social structures. Others suggest that the spiritual importance of fire was there from the start, that early humans, even in their most primitive stages, understood fire's power to connect them to the divine. This debate continues, but what is clear is that fire wasn't just something to be used, it was something to be revered. The bond that humans formed with fire extended beyond its physical utility. It became a way of understanding the world and their place within it. In more practical terms, as early humans began to form larger, more organized communities, fire also became central to social organization. Those who were entrusted with the fire, the keepers of the flame, likely held positions of importance within their tribes. The control of fire was, in many ways, a reflection of power. The person who could ensure that the fire was always burning had a direct hand in the survival of the group, and thus in its prosperity. Firekeeping wasn't just a job, it was a responsibility that carried a level of prestige. Those who could manage the fire were more likely to be entrusted with other leadership duties, whether in hunting, gathering, or decision-making. In these early human societies, conflict was always looming just beneath the surface. As communities grew, so did competition for resources like fire, food, and shelter. This wasn't just a matter of territorial disputes, it was a matter of social control. The ability to control fire became increasingly important as human groups expanded and began to establish more permanent settlements. Groups who could control fire were in a better position to survive the harsh conditions of the world, but they were also more likely to defend their fire fiercely, either from rival groups or from the unpredictable dangers of nature. This leads us to a crucial point: the rise of leadership. The individuals who could manage fire, maintain the hearth, and keep their communities safe were often elevated to positions of power. This wasn't about strength alone, it was about the ability to ensure the group's survival and stability. These leaders were not necessarily the strongest hunters or the most skilled warriors, but they were the ones who understood the importance of cooperation, shared resources, and the spiritual weight that came with controlling fire. These early leaders might have been seen as mediators, peacekeepers, or even spiritual guides, whose role was to maintain the balance between survival and conflict. Fire also began to symbolize unity, but this was not without its complications. As more groups began to settle and form larger communities, fire became central to the social fabric of society. Yet, with that came the problem of distribution. Who gets to control the fire? Who gets to tend to it? Who benefits from its warmth and security? Early conflicts over fire weren't just about survival. They were about fairness, equality, and access to the resources that determined life or death. In this way, fire wasn't just a tool or a commodity, it was the foundation of social organization. The allocation of fire in a group didn't just impact immediate survival, it shaped relationships and alliances, setting the stage for future conflicts. The first battles weren't over land or grand territory. They were about something far more basic. They were about access to fire, the source of warmth, protection, and prosperity. The possession of fire granted its holder the ability to shape the community, to lead it, and to protect it from the cold and from danger. The struggles to control it may have started small, but they laid the groundwork for much larger struggles that would follow in human history. So, the first disputes over fire didn't just spark battles over resources, they sparked the development of leadership, social structures, and the complex relationship that early humans would have with power, survival, and cooperation. These early struggles were not just about who had the biggest flame, they were about who could wield the power that came with it. And in the end, fire was more than just a tool for warmth or survival. It became the very essence of human society. It helped humans come together, form communities, and survive in an unpredictable world. But it also created the conditions for conflict, competition, and, eventually, the social dynamics that would define the course of human history. Fire, in all its warmth and danger, was the spark that ignited human civilization. As early humans increasingly relied on fire for survival, it wasn't just the immediate benefits of warmth and protection that defined its role. The control of fire eventually became a symbol of the larger struggle for resources, power, and societal control. Early humans were no longer simply living day to day, scraping by in small groups. They were starting to build something more complex. With fire at the center of their communities, it wasn't just about who could gather wood or light the flames, it was about who had the right to maintain it, control it, and ultimately, use it to shape their environment. The struggle for fire, as we've seen, was one of the first points of contention in early human societies. As Homo sapiens began to spread out and form more permanent settlements, the value of fire grew exponentially. Those who could keep the fire burning weren't just ensuring warmth and food, they were securing their group's survival, protection, and prosperity. They were also positioning themselves as leaders within their communities. The control over fire became more than just a practical matter, it was a social and political issue. Historically, the role of fire in shaping leadership and social organization can't be overstated. Leaders weren't necessarily the strongest or the most fearsome warriors. They were often those who understood the importance of resource management, community cohesion, and conflict resolution. Whoever controlled fire held the metaphorical flame of leadership, for without fire, life would have been immeasurably more difficult. Imagine, then, that the person responsible for maintaining the fire wasn't just the provider. They were also the mediator, the guardian of the tribe's well-being. Their position was not only a testament to their survival skills, but also a symbol of trust, strength, and the power of communal responsibility. But the battle for fire didn't just shape the individuals who controlled it, it shaped the way early human groups interacted with each other. As groups began to establish permanent dwellings and larger territories, the question of access to fire became more pronounced. Tribes and communities, once relatively isolated, started to clash over this most vital resource. These weren't formal wars at first. They were more like skirmishes or territorial disputes. However, as fire became more integrated into social and spiritual life, the stakes of these confrontations grew higher. The basic need for survival evolved into something more, a struggle for dominance. And here's where things get interesting. This wasn't just about physical survival anymore. Fire represented a psychological and cultural power. The power to control fire was the power to control the group's destiny. And as human groups expanded and developed social hierarchies, those who controlled fire could dictate much of the tribe's daily life. Who was allowed to access the fire? Who got to sit closest to it? Who had the power to keep it going? These weren't just questions about warmth. They were questions about status, about power, and about survival in a world where everything was uncertain. As conflicts over fire became more common, the first signs of social leadership emerged. Early humans likely began to establish more formalized systems of leadership, figures who could manage resources like fire, water, and food, and who could help maintain order within the group. These leaders weren't just powerful warriors, they were effective managers, capable of organizing the tribe's resources to ensure their survival in a world that was constantly changing. The importance of fire in these early societies wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. Fire wasn't just for cooking or warmth, it was central to rituals, ceremonies, and religious practices. Early humans understood the power of fire, and it became intertwined with their spiritual beliefs. They didn't just use fire for practical reasons. They used it to honor gods, to mark rites of passage, and to signify important cultural events. Fire was sacred, and those who controlled it were seen as having a direct connection to the divine. This sacredness of fire further solidified its importance in early human conflicts. And when humans began to encounter neighboring groups, perhaps competing for fire, food, or territory, these early conflicts were not simply fights for survival. They were fights for control over the very elements that allowed one group to thrive while another might perish. Fire was, in a very real sense, a matter of life and death, and this made it the central point of early human disputes. Groups fought not just to protect their resources, but to assert their dominance, to prove that they could control the most valuable asset available, fire. The power of fire, thus, became central to human civilization itself. It wasn't just about fighting for warmth. It was about establishing social structures, leadership, and the foundation for what would eventually grow into more organized forms of society. Early humans might not have known it at the time, but their struggles over fire were the precursors to the political systems, social hierarchies, and power dynamics that would come to define human civilization. The control of fire became a metaphor for the control of the tribe, for leadership, and for survival in a world that demanded constant adaptation. And so, as the importance of fire grew, so too did the complexity of the conflicts it engendered. What started as a simple struggle to survive turned into a fundamental struggle for power, identity, and culture. The first human conflicts over fire were the beginning of a long, complicated story about how humans would shape their world, not just through survival, but through the assertion of power, influence, and control over the resources that kept them alive. As the struggle for fire and resources continued, the concept of leadership within early human groups began to take on even more complexity. The control of fire was no longer simply about who had warmth and sustenance. It had transformed into a symbol of dominance, control, and social order. The early humans who could maintain fire, keep it alive, and share it with the group were not just survivors, they were leaders, and their ability to hold onto this essential resource gave them influence within the tribe. But fire wasn't just a tool for survival, it was the heart of early human culture. Fire was used in rituals, storytelling, and community bonding. The hearth, the fire around which people gathered, became the center of social life. It was where ideas were exchanged, where knowledge was passed down, and where early humans came together to form stronger bonds. Leaders weren't just those who could survive, they were those who could unite and lead the group through the ever-present threat of the unknown. The fire was central to that unity. It was more than just heat, it was a lifeline. Think about it. When you control the fire, you control the group. The person responsible for keeping the fire going isn't just a caretaker of warmth. They are a symbol of the tribe's survival. Over time, this responsibility likely gave rise to specific roles, leaders who were tasked not only with protecting fire, but also with ensuring that the resources of the group were distributed fairly and that any disputes over fire or territory were settled quickly and efficiently. Historians still argue about the emergence of leadership roles in early human societies. Some believe that leadership developed organically as humans realized the need for organized effort in times of scarcity or conflict. Others suggest that the need for a formalized structure where power was clearly designated and passed down came much later, perhaps with the rise of agriculture and permanent settlements. However, what's clear is that the struggle over fire likely catalyzed the evolution of leadership. The person who could manage fire, who could protect it, and who could use it strategically to the benefit of the group had power. And with power came responsibility. Leaders had to manage not only the physical needs of their tribe, but also the social dynamics that would keep the group united and strong. Fire, by this point, wasn't just for cooking. It was used to forge tools, to build shelters, and to protect from the dangers of the wild. It became the center of daily life and, by extension, a central pillar of early human social organization. As these social structures began to evolve, the people responsible for the fire also became responsible for overseeing group dynamics, mediating disputes, making decisions about food distribution, and ensuring that resources were shared fairly. The ability to maintain fire thus became an integral part of leadership, transforming fire from a simple tool into a potent symbol of authority, power, and control. As fire became central to the formation of human society, its symbolic importance also grew. Fire was associated with creation and destruction, warmth and danger, survival and death. It wasn't just a tool, it was a representation of the forces that early humans couldn't fully control but had to respect. This duality of fire, its ability to give life but also to destroy, made it a powerful symbol in early human spirituality. Early humans likely viewed fire as a connection to the divine, a force that could protect them but also had the power to turn against them. The stories and rituals surrounding fire likely helped early humans make sense of their world, giving them a framework to understand both the blessings and dangers it presented. The significance of fire also extended to early human conflict. As groups began to settle into more permanent territories, the possession of fire became more of a social and territorial issue. Tribes that controlled fire could protect their lands, keep predators at bay, and ensure that they could survive through harsh conditions. Those who didn't have fire were at a distinct disadvantage. This created a power imbalance, one that could lead to conflict. In this way, fire didn't just shape social relationships within a tribe, it also became a catalyst for conflict between tribes. The control of fire became intertwined with territorial disputes. As early human groups expanded and competed for resources, including fire, territory, and food, fire became a symbol of ownership and power. Whoever controlled fire in a given territory could dominate the surrounding environment, and this dominance had both physical and symbolic power. The group that controlled fire had the upper hand, not just in terms of survival, but in establishing social and cultural order. In essence, the fire that once served merely as a tool for warmth and cooking had transformed into a powerful resource that could shape the social, cultural, and political dynamics of early human groups. It wasn't just about survival, it was about control. The early conflicts over fire set the stage for the larger, more complex social structures that would eventually emerge in human history. The role of fire in early human society wasn't just about keeping the cold at bay, it was about keeping order, ensuring leadership, and securing dominance. As early humans continued to evolve and adapt to their ever-changing environment, the fire they controlled became not just a lifeline, but a symbol of their place in the natural world. The struggle to protect fire from others, the creation of social roles to manage it, and the spiritual and cultural significance that grew around it laid the groundwork for the rise of organized societies. Fire, in all its power and danger, was the first spark, the ignition point, for the complex human societies that would follow. As early human societies evolved and settled into more permanent communities, the importance of fire continued to grow, intertwining with the social fabric of the group in ways that would shape the trajectory of human civilization. But the first wars over fire were not just about territorial disputes, they were the initial, chaotic sparks that led to the understanding that survival required more than just physical strength. It required organization, leadership, and strategic thinking. What began as simple fights for control over a crucial resource would eventually evolve into more sophisticated conflicts as humans began to understand the role of fire in shaping not only their daily lives, but their society as a whole. In many ways, fire laid the foundation for the earliest human power structures. Leaders, whether they were the strongest hunters or the best firekeepers, rose to prominence because they could control the fire. They were responsible for the welfare of the group, ensuring that the fire stayed alive, and in doing so, they became symbols of stability and survival. These early leaders weren't just the fiercest warriors, they were the ones who could manage the tribe's most valuable resource, the one that guaranteed warmth, safety, and food. Without fire, survival would have been nearly impossible in the harsh climates of the prehistoric world. So, controlling the fire became synonymous with controlling the tribe's future. The early struggles over fire weren't isolated events. They were the first lessons in the development of human conflict and the importance of managing resources. As fire became central to the daily lives of early humans, it forced them to confront larger questions about leadership, authority, and power. These early power struggles weren't limited to battles for fire alone. They also involved the need to control food, water, and territory. However, fire remained the most important resource, as it not only kept the group alive, but also provided the ability to create tools, defend against predators, and prepare food. As a result, the control of fire became a key component of early social organization, shaping the ways early humans structured their communities and interacted with one another. But these early disputes over fire also highlighted something important: the need for cooperation. The fights for fire were, at their core, not just about gaining control, but about survival. Early humans learned that without working together, they would fail. These first conflicts revealed the importance of unity, of coming together to share resources, defend the group, and ensure the survival of all. And as the need for cooperation grew, so did the complexity of the social structures that emerged. What started as a group of individuals struggling to survive soon became a community bound by shared responsibility and leadership. The shift from a nomadic lifestyle to more settled communities brought its own set of challenges and opportunities. Early humans, while still focused on survival, began to understand the value of stability and organization. Settling in one place, with a reliable fire source, allowed early humans to experiment with more permanent shelters, agriculture, and, over time, the development of more sophisticated social structures. With the security of fire and shelter, early humans could focus on other aspects of survival, such as developing tools, hunting methods, and even cultural practices that would eventually lead to the rise of civilizations. However, even with the progress made in controlling fire and settling down, the power dynamics of early human societies remained fragile. Leadership, whether formal or informal, was still based on who controlled the most critical resources, chief among them, fire. The ability to maintain fire, manage its resources, and ensure its equitable distribution continued to be a cornerstone of social life. In many ways, fire was the original symbol of authority, not only because of its practicality, but because it was the life-giving force that ensured the group's continued existence. These early struggles for fire and control were the foundation for the development of human civilization. The concepts of ownership, power, and social order that emerged from these conflicts would eventually give rise to more formalized systems of governance. What started with small skirmishes over fire evolved into larger conflicts that would define the course of human history. The struggle for dominance, resources, and survival shaped early human society, and in many ways, it laid the groundwork for the wars, civilizations, and political structures that would follow. In conclusion, while the first human conflicts over fire may have been small and chaotic, their legacy is far-reaching. These early disputes were the first steps toward understanding the importance of resources in human survival, the rise of leadership, and the formation of social structures. Fire, more than any other resource, shaped the trajectory of human civilization, teaching early humans the importance of cooperation, strategy, and leadership. The control of fire didn't just ensure survival, it defined who had power, who led, and who thrived in the world that was constantly changing around them.